Got a little slideshow for you today. Like I said, we returned from our trip to Mexico. And I want to start with a little anecdote about bees, of all things. The first time that I learned about the concept called overdetermination, I was reading an article about the deeply concerning and potentially catastrophic decline of bee populations in the United States. Bees were disappearing at an alarming rate, and researchers were trying to pinpoint why. Certain pesticides and insecticides were killing them. Climate change was killing them. Monocultural farming, that is, growing one crop over massive tracts of land, was killing them. And the article I was reading called this problem the problem of bees dying, overdetermined. That is, the bees could have been dying due to any single one of these problems alone. The fact that there were so many contributing factors to the death of bees made it difficult to determine what steps to take first. There were so many factors at play that it was difficult to identify any one that would help to save the bees from their demise. This is an overdetermined problem, a problem so complex with so many causes that it is difficult to parse out which to address first. For any of us paying an ounce of attention to the world around us right now, we might really relate to the scientists and farmers dealing with the overdetermined problem of the bees. For those of us thinking deeply about the issues surrounding us today, we understand that there are few one-size-fits-all solutions to complex systems like racism, sexism, poverty, and climate change, just to name some. We'll get back to bees in a little while. Last week, I had the immense pleasure of traveling with 5 of our youth, Sam Nardone, Jason Staubach, Sean Carmichael, Zoe Rack, and Lena Koshik, along with AJ and Melissa Rack, to the borderlands in Douglas, Arizona, and Agua Prieta, Sonora, Mexico. Our mission was to immerse ourselves in the work of a Presbyterian organization called Frontera de Cristo, Borders of Christ. Frontera de Cristo cooperates with many ministries at the border, and we had the opportunity to visit and speak with them during our trip. One of our very first activities was an infrastructure tour along the fence. So you've probably been hearing a number of people saying things like, "We should build a fence," lately. Maybe one in particular. Well, there is one. You can see it right there in that photo. And really, there are hundreds in huge chunks along the entire border. And they're very big and very ugly, and they are deeply militarized and also very expensive. We're talking billions of dollars expensive. After this infrastructure tour, we drove through the area where the maquilas have been built, the factories that the U.S. built just on the other side of that wall. This photo was taken in Arizona. Literally just feet from the border, there are these factories. And at the maquilas, U.S. companies can pay very low wages to Mexican workers. We learned that under NAFTA, heavily subsidized U.S. agriculture drove some 2 million Mexican farmers out of business. What resulted was a massive migration from the south of Mexico to the north of Mexico to work in the maquilas. The low wages have kept most workers in poverty. Poverty feeds the crime rings and the drug trade on the border. And addiction causes all manners of problems. Of course, this poverty issue is also creating a huge migration of Mexicans into the United States. On Tuesday, we visited with CREDA, a shelter and a 12-step drug rehabilitation center that serves folks who are addicted. After we learned about CREDA, we piled into our van to join them in the desert, where we ventured to refill a few water stations on a nearby ranch meant for migrants to drink from as they were on their journey. This is a simple but powerful gift to many crossing the desert who often die of exposure and dehydration at staggering rates. So you can see in this photo, I hope you can see the water stations under a tree there. Sadly, we also learned that there are some people who set out to destroy these water stations, and also some people who will set out poisoned water for migrants to drink while they're crossing. It is monsoon season in Agua Prieta right now, and so we did manage to get the van stuck in the mud in the desert, and then the truck with the water got very stuck near the water station. So while several men from Creda worked to free the truck, we ate a simple lunch near the water station. And then we hiked a mile or two from the water station to the wall. So this was the view when we were starting out. You can see the wall in the background. A number of us fell, or as I like to call it, skillfully barrel rolled. But all of us became caught and scratched on various thorny plants. It was a difficult hike, even in broad daylight, and many migrants journey at nighttime. During the summer, they often drown in the flash floods that are caused by the monsoons, where they die from the immense heat. When we reached the fence, as you can see here, go back one, AJ, please. Thanks. When we reached the fence, as you can see here, the gates were open on the bottom to accommodate the flash flooding. The flash flooding is actually so powerful it can knock the wall over, so they had to install gates. And in those open areas, there are trigger wires, and someone bumped one of the trigger wires, and the Border Patrol showed up in just a couple of minutes. It was very quick. Apparently, there are also detectors buried under the dirt on the other side of the fence if someone makes it across and managing not to trip the wire on the fence. It was not difficult to imagine how harrowing this experience could be in these conditions, trying to outrun and outsmart the massive border infrastructure and police, all while trying to stay healthy and uninjured, and perhaps while even carrying children with you. Crossing is not something that can be done on a lark. That evening, we met in a drizzle at the McDonald's parking lot in Douglas, Arizona. We had stopped to retrieve several boxes of small white crosses. Each were painted with the name of someone who had died crossing in this particular region of the border. There were hundreds, and we didn't even pick up all of the crosses. We stood along the road just in front of the border crossing, where cars were slowly rolling into Mexico. We took turns calling out the names of those who, as Zoe remarked, had become a cross trying to get a cross. After each name, we called out, "Presente," present. This was to call into presence the names for whom we are continuing in the struggle for liberation from the desperation the border embodies and engenders. We then lined the curb along the road with the crosses. What was most powerful to me about this vigil was that it was simultaneously prayerful and also an act of solidarity with Mexicans, and also it was an act of peaceful demonstration against U.S. immigration policies. Wednesday morning was a little lighter. We had a tour of Café Justo, which is a coffee cooperative that partners with Frontera de Cristo, which has worked to reestablish small coffee farms in southern Mexico. The coffee is grown organically, and the farmers sell the coffee directly, mostly to churches and small cafes. Because of this cooperative, these farmers are able to earn living wages, which is awesome. I asked Adrian, one of our tour guides, about big coffee chains like Folgers and Starbucks. He said, "You know, here we call that Star Sucks." It's like the Walmart of coffee. They say they brew fair trade coffee, but whenever I've asked, it's not available. Best to just buy fair trade. It's the best way to make sure that farmers are paid a living wage and are not held in abusive situations. Well, we were very fortunate that Cafe Justo was just across the street from the church where we were staying, and so we got to buy their coffee all week. Wednesday afternoon, we visited another empowering organization, a garden and work center called Dugla Prieta. The centerpiece of their program is a permaculture demonstration site designed to teach families sustainable food practices and production techniques, including gardening, aquaculture, and small livestock raising. We spent the afternoon working in the garden. I love this photo of Sam with an axe. And learning about Dugla Prieta's programming for the poor over lunch. That afternoon, we learned more about the wages and the living expenses of maquila workers. We decided as a group that we would accept the challenge from Frontera de Cristo to shop and eat for a day on the wages of a Mexican maquila worker. After paying rent and utilities, we were left collectively, there were 8 of us, remember, with 108 pesos, or roughly $6 per day, not just for food, but also clothing, medicine, and incidentals. We decided that we would have to forego buying new clothes and that we couldn't save for medical care because we needed to eat. So we went to the grocery store with our $6 for the day, roughly 30 cents per meal per person. We bought rice, beans, 2 bananas because we couldn't afford 3, a small package of spinach, a dozen eggs, which were on sale, but we later found out that they were on sale because they weren't good anymore, a small onion because we couldn't afford a large onion, and 2 packs of corn tortillas. I think we all found it very eye-opening how closely we had to calculate our shopping and how little we could actually purchase. It's also worth mentioning here that applying for a visa to the United States costs a maquila worker 2 to 3 weeks worth of their salary. So if you can even manage to save this amount of money, it's still a major risk because you can apply for your visa, and if the United States determines that you're a risk to stay beyond your visa undocumented in the United States, they can reject your application and you don't get your money back. I also felt particularly conscious of how easily we could step into and out of this type of food experiment. This trip made me realize how simple things like eating and even hiking are things that I take for granted as fun, stress-free activities. Now, I say hiking because our time spent in the desert looked a lot like hiking, even though we were thinking about what it would be like to cross the border. Never in my life have I been forced by circumstances to sleep outside or to walk for long distances outside. It has always been a freely chosen activity. That evening, we spent dinner time at Kame, a shelter for migrants recently deported or attempting to cross. We ate dinner with 4 migrants. They had various experiences of migration and deportation. Sam sat next to a man who was undocumented in the States with his family for many years. But then he was found out to be undocumented, and he was incarcerated for 5 years. While he was incarcerated, he learned English, and when we met him, he had only just been deported to Agua Prieta. His entire family was still in the States, and he told us that the following day he planned to go back. He was going to cross again. And Sam asked him, well, what happens if you get caught? And he said, well, I will probably go back to prison, only this time it will be for 10 years. Another migrant sitting next to me told us about picking tobacco in Virginia. It was so hot, he said, and they were being worked so hard that people were getting sick and even dying. But this is not uncommon in migrant work in the United States. The conditions are extremely difficult. You can even go home and read up on the current disaster with Driscoll's berries and their migrant worker abuse. Our last day in Agua Prieta, we ate our maquila diet and also visited the Migrant Resource Center. Now, this is a place where migrants can come to get fresh socks because their feet tend to get so bloodied and blistered while they're walking, and information about their journey ahead. We were told that human smugglers and traffickers liked to just hang out outside the building and observe who was coming in and coming out. Now, sex trafficking and smuggling is a big business at the border. And migrants are warned to trust no one who offers to help them cross. You can see here it's smaller, but this is a map of Arizona from 1999 to 2009, and all those red dots are deaths in the desert. So migrants are warned to trust no one to help them when they cross because it often ends in death. As coyotes or smugglers make promises that they won't keep, they'll say, yeah, go ahead, I'll call you on the cell phone and tell you where to go, and then they never call, and they're lost in the desert. And so this leaves migrants exposed to the extreme heat and other life-threatening situations. Our very last meeting was with the Border Patrol Public Relations Office. Go back, AJ. This is one of the posters that was in the Migrant Resource Center. It means don't expose yourself. Okay, you can go to the next one. Our very last meeting was with the Border Patrol Public Relations Office. We were especially quiet after our week of immersion and learning, as you might imagine. At first, we asked questions about numbers. How many people did they detain? How many of those people had malintent? How many had drugs or weapons? But the Border Patrol deflected these questions by telling us that they didn't keep numbers or statistics on these things and that we would have to look them up elsewhere. We also asked about how changes can be made in immigration policy based on the experiences of the Border Patrol agents on the border. Unfortunately, it seems there are not channels in place for this kind of feedback. When we couldn't ask about facts and we couldn't ask about opinions, we asked about the day-to-day work and discerned that Border Patrol agents often fear for their lives in potentially dangerous apprehensions. Some people do cross with weapons or malintent. But the conversation was difficult, and we all left feeling like there were many unanswered questions. Before we left Agua Prieta, we said a prayer at the wall. You can see here the Mexican government has commissioned some artists to paint some portions of the wall, and they're really beautiful murals. We then headed to Tucson, where we hiked. That's in Saguaro National Park. And we slept. And we decompressed for a day and a half before heading back to New Jersey. So for me, there were two prominent takeaways from this trip. The first was that it was so important and so powerful to see people helping, to see so many people empowering each other, changing systems, resisting policies, and giving deeply of themselves.